Let's begin with a word you'll meet on almost every page of TOGAF: enterprise. When most people hear it, they picture one giant company, a famous logo, a head office, thousands of staff. That image isn't wrong, but it's far too small. So let's open it up. Picture your school putting on a big play. Who really makes it happen? The actors, of course, but also the students painting the scenery, the parents stitching costumes, the music teacher leading the band, and the volunteer selling tickets at the door. They come from different classes and groups, and some aren't even students at all. Yet every one of them is pulling toward a single shared goal, a brilliant show. That whole team, bound together by a common goal, is the true meaning of an enterprise. In TOGAF, an enterprise is any group of organizations that share common goals. The magic word there is goals, not boundaries. An enterprise can be a whole company, or just one slice of it you happen to care about. And it doesn't have to stop at your own walls. It can reach outward to include your partners, your suppliers, even your customers, as long as everyone is rowing in the same direction. That's why an enterprise can take so many shapes. It might be a single department or an entire corporation. It might be one government office or several agencies working hand in hand. It could be a family of companies spread across the globe but owned by the same parent. Or it could be a chain of separate businesses, like a supply chain, choosing to cooperate towards something they all want. Different sizes, different shapes, but always the same thread running through them: shared goals. And here's a tip that will save you real headaches. When you're just starting out, you don't have to map the entire universe at once. Choose one small, meaningful slice of the enterprise and begin right there. Small wins build momentum, and momentum is what carries the big work forward. So that's what an enterprise is. Not a building, not a logo, but any group united by shared goals. But knowing what an enterprise is only sets the stage. The real question is why we'd go to all the trouble of architecting one in the first place. And that's exactly where we're heading next. In the last section, we figured out what an enterprise actually is. Now comes the obvious next question. Why would we go to the trouble of architecting one? Here's the whole answer in 3 words: to control change. Let me show you what that means. Imagine you own a house, but you're dreaming of a better one. More space, more light, a proper kitchen. You don't bulldoze the place and start from scratch. You renovate. And if you're sensible, you don't just grab a hammer and start knocking down walls. You bring in an architect to draw up a plan first. That plan, it turns out, is the entire point. Enterprise architecture does exactly that, but for an organization. It captures a clear picture of where things stand today and a clear picture of where you want to be tomorrow, the target state. Then it maps the route between the two. It takes a fuzzy business vision and turns it into models and principles that everyone can actually see, share, and follow. Now here's the tricky part. While you renovate your house, you still have to live in it. You still need to cook dinner, take a shower, and sleep at night. A business is no different. It has to keep running and keep serving its customers even while it's busy transforming. The purpose of enterprise architecture is to hold that balance so you can change boldly without the day-to-day falling apart. A good plan also saves you from nasty surprises. Knock down the wrong wall, and the ceiling comes with it. In a large organization, one careless change can ripple out in ways nobody expected. Enterprise architecture gives you a wide enough view to manage that complexity, keep everyone coordinated, and shrink the risk of those unintended consequences. And one quick myth to bust. This doesn't only apply to giant, top-of-the-company plans. Change can mean the whole house or just the kitchen. Big or small, the idea is the same. So that's the purpose of enterprise architecture, to guide change from today's reality to a chosen future, steadily, safely, and without ever switching the business off. But knowing the purpose is only half the story. The real question any leader will ask is, what do we actually get out of all this? And those benefits are exactly where we're going next. We now know what an enterprise is and why we'd architect one: to control change. So here's the question every leader eventually asks: what do we actually get out of it? Let me show you with a building. Picture a large apartment building. Over the years, every single flat quietly bought its own stuff: its own washing machine, its own water tank, its own little backup generator, even its own security guard. Nobody planned it this way. Each flat just solved its own problem whenever a need came up. The result? The building is stuffed with duplicates, and everyone is paying for it. Now imagine a manager who finally looks at the whole building at once. They spot all that doubling up and set up shared services instead. One laundry room, one water system, one generator, one guard for everyone. Costs drop, space frees up, and the whole building runs smoother. That's the first big benefit of enterprise architecture. It spots duplication across an organization and replaces it with capabilities that everyone can share. Here's a benefit people really love. Because the manager now has a full inventory, they can finally answer a question that used to trigger an expensive, "let's just buy a new one." The question is, do we already have this? Organizations are full of tools they've barely touched, often using only a fraction of what they paid for. Enterprise architecture gives you a clear picture of what you already own, so you stop buying things twice and squeeze far more value out of what's already there. And because leaders can now see the entire building on a single floor plan, decisions get faster and smarter. When something needs to change, they're not guessing in the dark. They can see what connects to what and act with confidence. That is agility, the ability to respond quickly when the world shifts. One honest warning, though: not everyone welcomes this. The people who loved having their own private generator may feel like the manager is bulldozing their turf, so it only works with genuine support from the top. But the prize is worth it. Lower cost, less waste, more value from what you already own, and faster, braver decisions. So those are the benefits, which leaves one natural question: what is this TOGAF thing actually made of? What are its major pieces? That's exactly where we're heading next. So far, we've covered what an enterprise is, why we'd architect one, and what we gain from it. Now, for a very practical question: what is TOGAF actually made of? The easiest way to picture it is as a cookbook. At the heart of TOGAF is one official cookbook. This is its core, what's called the fundamental content. And like any good cookbook, it's organized into chapters. TOGAF has 6 of them. The first is a short intro chapter that explains the basics and the core ideas. Then comes the star of the book, the master recipe itself, the step-by-step method for actually building architecture. It's called the ADM. Next is a chapter of techniques, the special skills that support that recipe. After that, a chapter on adapting the recipe to your own kitchen. Then a chapter describing what your finished dishes should look like, the content you produce. And finally, a chapter on running the whole kitchen, the capability and the governance. But no single cookbook can cover every situation. So sitting right next to it is a shelf of slimmer companion guides, each one diving deep into a single theme. How to cook fast and flexibly. How to keep things safe. How to cook for a modern, digital kitchen. Here's a point worth remembering. The main cookbook plus these companion guides together are what we officially call the TOGAF standard. And beyond even that, there's a whole library, extra reference books, quick pocket cards, posters for the wall. All useful, but the part you'll genuinely cook from is the standard, the fundamental content, and the companion guides. So why bother with a cookbook at all instead of just winging it in the kitchen? Because a trusted, standard recipe means you don't reinvent the wheel every time. You make fewer expensive mistakes, and you get a result you can actually repeat. In short, it takes the risk out of building. But here's the thing about any recipe. It needs ingredients. And TOGAF builds its architecture from 4 main ingredients called domains. Those 4 domains are exactly where we're heading next. Last section ended with a promise. Every architecture is built from 4 ingredients, which architects call domains. Think of them as 4 different views of the same organization. And the easiest way to understand them is to imagine opening a restaurant. Before you buy a single pan, you decide what the restaurant actually is, what food you'll serve, who your customers are, how an order flows from the table to the kitchen and back, and who does which job. That is your business architecture, the strategy, the processes, and the people. And here's the golden rule of TOGAF. This one comes first. Everything else exists to serve it. You don't choose your oven before you've decided you're opening a pizzeria. Once you know the concept, you ask a new question. What information do we need to keep? Your recipes, your stock levels, your supplier list, every customer's order and booking. How all of that is organized and stored is your data architecture. It's the restaurant's memory, the facts it has to record in order to run. Next, what tools actually do the work? The oven, the booking system, the till at the front, the screen that fires orders back to the kitchen. In an organization, these are the software applications. Your application architecture describes each of these tools, how they talk to one another, and how they support the day-to-day processes you defined earlier. And finally, what does all of that sit on top of? The gas, the electricity, the plumbing, the building itself. None of the appliances work without it. That foundation is your technology architecture, the servers, the networks, and the infrastructure that everything else runs on. So there you have it, 4 domains. Business, what you're doing. Data, what you need to know. Applications, the tools that do it. And technology, the foundation underneath. Architects sometimes shorten these to just BDAT. And notice the direction. You start with the business and let it drive the other 3, never the other way around. Now, you could describe a whole restaurant in a single sentence or in a 200-page manual. Same restaurant, wildly different levels of detail. That idea, zooming in and out, is exactly where we're going next. Last time, I said you can describe a restaurant in 1 sentence or in 200 pages. That gap is what abstraction is all about. The trick is simple. Instead of trying to swallow one giant problem whole, you break it into layers, from a blurry big picture right down to precise detail. The easiest way to feel this is to plan a holiday. It always starts with why. You're not booking anything yet. You just know one thing. We're exhausted and we want to relax somewhere warm in the next few months. That's the context. The goal, the motivation, the whole reason for the trip. Architects call this the contextual level, and it answers a single question. Why? Next, you sharpen that into what you actually need, still without picking anything specific. A beach destination, about a week long, somewhere family-friendly and not too pricey. You're describing the problem and the requirements, not the solution yet. This is the conceptual level, and it answers what. Now you work out how to put it together, but still in general terms. To pull this off, you'll need flights, a hotel by the beach, a rental car, and some travel insurance. Notice you've named the kinds of things you need, but not a single brand. This is the logical level, and it answers how. And finally, you get concrete. This exact flight, that specific beachfront hotel, this particular car from that rental company. Real names, real bookings, real prices. This is the physical level, and it answers with what? Here's something interesting. In a big organization, the enterprise architect usually lives in those upper, blurrier layers. The precise booking is handed to specialists called solution architects. So abstraction is really just 4 zoom levels of the very same trip. Contextual, why? Conceptual, what? Logical, how? Physical, with what? Each one a little sharper than the one above it. And here's a lovely side effect. Once you've planned a few trips this way, you start to notice you keep needing the same kinds of things: flights, hotels, insurance, again and again. So wouldn't it be smart to save those plans and reuse them instead of starting from a blank page every single time? That idea, reusing what you've already built, is exactly where we're heading next. Last time we landed on a simple idea. Once you've built something good, you'd be daft to start from a blank page every time. The Enterprise Continuum is TOGAF's answer to exactly that. And the easiest way to picture it is the world's most organized library. Imagine a giant library holding every design your organization has ever produced. Now, the shelves themselves, the actual stored material, that's called the repository, and we'll get to it shortly. The Enterprise Continuum is something subtler. It's the catalog, the clever labeling system that sits on top of the shelves and tells you exactly where everything is and how it all relates. On its own, it stores nothing. It simply makes the library usable. The catalog arranges everything along a spectrum, from the most general to the most specific. At one end sit the broad, one-size-fits-all designs that almost any company on Earth could use. Move along, and they get more specialized. Designs common to your particular industry. And right at the far end sits the bespoke design, tailored precisely to your organization and no one else. Same shelf, steadily increasing specificity. Now, this library actually has 2 wings. The first wing holds the plans and blueprints, the design ideas and descriptions of what good looks like. That is the architecture continuum. The second wing holds the real products, the catalog cards for actual tools and systems you can go out and deploy. That is the solutions continuum. Blueprints in one wing, real working products in the other. And here is where it truly earns its keep. Suppose your shelves hold 200 product cards. You really don't want to read all 200. So you apply a couple of filters. Say, must be a database, and must be web-based. And suddenly, only the 2 cards that match light up. In seconds, you found something you can reuse instead of going out and buying yet another. That, in one line, is the entire point. Reuse before you rebuild. So the Enterprise Continuum is simply a smart catalog. It sorts your designs from general to specific, splits them into blueprints and real products, and lets you filter in an instant to find what's worth reusing. But a catalog is useless without shelves to point at. So where does all this content actually live? Those shelves, the repository itself, are exactly where we're heading next. Last time, the Enterprise Continuum was our clever catalog. But a catalog is useless without a building full of shelves to point at. That building is the architecture repository, the place where all your architecture content actually lives. So let's step inside the library. In real life, this library is usually something rather unglamorous, a SharePoint site perhaps, or a tool like Jira. At heart, it's just a well-organized document store. TOGAF suggests a layout for it, not a strict rule, just sensible guidance, and most organizations end up with something close to it. So picture the building divided into clearly labeled rooms. The busiest room is the projects room, where every live project keeps its working papers. TOGAF calls this the architecture landscape. Right next door is the reference room, full of proven, reusable designs you're encouraged to borrow instead of rebuilding. That's the reference library. And across the hall is the rules room, holding the standards that everyone must comply with, the standards library. Those three rooms hold the bulk of your day-to-day content. Then there's the records room, where every decision and every compliance check gets logged. It used to be called the governance log. Today, it's the governance repository. And there's a single front desk that gathers every request coming in from every project, so that requirements never get scattered around. That is the Architecture Requirements Repository. Two more pieces sit quietly in the background. There's a filing rulebook that dictates how everything must be labeled and structured so it all fits together neatly. That's the Metamodel. And there's the back office that keeps the whole library running. The people, the governance, the practice itself, known as the architecture capability. So the architecture repository is simply the organized building behind the catalog. Rooms for live projects, for reusable references, and for standards. A room for governance records, and a desk for requirements. All held together by that filing rulebook. Now, that rulebook matters more than it sounds. Because if everyone files and describes things their own way, the whole library quickly descends into chaos. So how does TOGAF make sure every single design is structured the same way? That filing rulebook, the content framework, and the Metamodel is exactly where we're heading next. Last time we ended on a filing rulebook, the thing that keeps the whole library consistent. This section is that rulebook up close, the content framework and the Enterprise Metamodel. Two formal pieces that make sure everyone builds and describes architecture the same way. And the perfect way to picture them is a box of Lego. Think about what makes Lego so powerful. First, there's a fixed set of standard brick types, a 2x4 block, a wheel, a window. In architecture, these standard pieces are called building blocks or entities. Things like a business capability, a process, or an application. TOGAF hands you a default set, and you can design your own if you ever need to. But the bricks alone aren't the real magic. The magic is the studs and tubes, the system that defines exactly how any brick is allowed to connect to any other. The Metamodel does precisely that. It lays down the official relationships, which pieces attach to which and how. So a capability always connects to a process in the same agreed way, every single time. That's why people call the Metamodel a model of how to model. It isn't your design. It's the rulebook your design has to obey. And here is the payoff. Because everyone snaps the same bricks together in the same way, every model comes out consistent. You can check that nothing is missing. That's completeness. And you can trace any single piece right through the whole build. That's traceability. So where does the content framework fit in? If the Metamodel is the brick system, the content framework is the set of labeled boxes you sort everything into. It categorizes your finished work, your diagrams, your catalogs and matrices, and your formal documents so that anyone can find the right piece in the right box. Together, the two of them drive one thing above all else: consistency. Same bricks, same rules, same labeled boxes every time. So the content framework and the Enterprise Metamodel are simply the standard kit. The Metamodel gives you the bricks and the rules for clicking them together. The content framework gives you the boxes to file the results. The result is architecture that's consistent, complete, and traceable no matter who builds it. But a brilliant kit is useless sitting in a cupboard. Someone has to actually pick it up and build, and a whole team has to be set up to do that well. That team and how you stand it up is called the architecture capability, and it's exactly where we're heading next. Last time, we assembled the standard kit. But a kit sitting in a cupboard wins absolutely nothing. To actually do architecture, and to keep doing it well, you need a proper team set up around that kit. TOGAF calls this your architecture capability, your ability to develop, use, and sustain architecture, and to use it to steer change. The easiest way to picture it is building a professional sports club. Here's the thing. A ball and a set of boots don't win you the league. What wins is a club. A group of people organized on purpose who can perform week after week after week. An architecture capability is exactly that. Not the documents themselves, but the organized team and setup that produces those documents reliably, again and again. So, what does a real club actually need? First, players in clear positions, every one of them knowing their job. Those are your roles and responsibilities. Who is the architect? Who reviews the work? Who signs it off? Second, training, because raw talent alone quickly fades. That is skills, keeping the whole team sharp and up to date. Third, a playbook. Agreed plays the team runs, so nobody is reinventing tactics in the middle of the match. Those are your processes and techniques, the standard way you do architecture around here. And fourth, the gear and the ground. The boots, the pitch, the training facilities. Those are your tools, the modeling software and the repository we met earlier. But a club with no coach and no referee quickly descends into chaos. So you also need governance, someone steering the strategy, and someone making sure the rules are actually followed. Put all of it together, and the capability does three jobs. It develops the architecture, building the plans. It uses them to run and govern change, actually playing the matches. And it sustains the whole operation, season after season. TOGAF even sketches an example layout for this team in layers. The everyday running of any business on top, the architecture-specific work in the middle, and the foundations, the content, the repository, the techniques, sitting underneath. So the architecture capability is simply your architecture function, set up like a serious club. Clear roles, real skills, an agreed playbook, the right tools, and proper governance, all working together to develop, use, and sustain your architecture. Now, every club that takes the field faces the very same thing, the chance that something goes wrong. An injury, a bad call, a nasty surprise from the other side. Architecture is no different. Every change you make carries risk. So how do we spot it and handle it before it bites? Managing that risk is exactly where we're heading next. Every team that takes the field faces the chance that something goes wrong, and architecture is no different. So TOGAF builds in a way to handle that. It's called risk management, and it runs quietly through the whole method from start to finish. The easiest way to feel it is to picture planning a long road trip with a storm forecast on the way. Before you even start the engine, you do something smart. You list everything that could go wrong. A flat tire, heavy rain, running low on fuel, getting lost. You can't deal with a danger you haven't named, so naming them all is always step one. But here's the key move. Not every risk deserves the same panic. So you weigh each one on two simple scales. First, how bad would it be if it actually happened? That's the impact. Second, how likely is it to happen at all? That's the frequency. Put those two together and you get a risk's true severity. A flat tire on a quiet afternoon is low. A brake failure on a mountain pass in a storm is extreme. Same trip, very different scores. Now, the level of risk you're staring at right now, before you've lifted a finger, has a name. That's your initial risk. And of course, you don't just stare at it, you act. You pack a spare tire, you fit better wipers, you fill the tank, you download the map offline. Each action is a mitigation, a deliberate step to push that severity down. After you've taken those steps, measure the risk again. It hasn't vanished, it almost never does, but it's smaller now. That lower, leftover level is called the residual risk. The whole game of risk management is simple to state. Shrink the initial risk down to a residual risk you can comfortably live with. But you don't do this once and forget it. Storms shift, roads change, new dangers appear. So risk is watched continuously, all the way through the journey. And that ongoing watch is part of governance, the coach and referee we met last time. So, to recap, name every risk. Score it by impact times frequency. Mitigate to cut it down from initial to residual. And keep monitoring it the whole way through. Now, a lot of risk in architecture comes from one particular thing: the gap between where you are today and where you want to be. Measuring that gap precisely has its own neat technique. And that technique is exactly where we're heading next. Last time, we said a lot of risk comes from the gap between where you are today and where you want to be. Gap analysis is the simple technique that measures that gap exactly. The easiest way to picture it is checking your kitchen against the recipe you plan to cook tomorrow. It comes down to two lists. The first is what's actually in your kitchen right now: the eggs, the flour, the half-used tub of butter. Architects call this the baseline, your as-is, where you stand today. The second list is what the recipe actually demands. That's the target, your to-be, where you want to get to. Now you lay the two lists side by side and compare them, item by item. And only three things can ever happen. Something you have and also need? Great, you keep it. Something the recipe needs, but you don't have? That's a gap, and it goes straight onto the shopping list. And something you have, but the recipe doesn't need? Clear it out, it's surplus. Architects do this with a simple grid. Your current building blocks listed down one side, the target building blocks across the top. Where they meet and match, you keep. A target with nothing matching it is a gap to fill, and a current item with no target is one to retire. That grid turns a vague feeling of "we need to improve" into an exact, checkable list. And that shopping list is pure gold. Because each gap now becomes a concrete piece of work. Buy this, build that, retire the other. Those pieces of work are called work packages, the actual jobs that teams go off and deliver. No guesswork, no vague, "I think we need more." Just a precise list of what's missing and what's surplus. So gap analysis is simply this: baseline versus target, compared on a grid, producing a precise list of gaps to close. And with that, our foundations are complete. We know what an enterprise is, why we architect one, and what we gain. We know what TOGAF is made of, how it's structured, stored, governed, and kept safe from risk. The groundwork is done. Now it's finally time to pick up all these tools and actually build, step by careful step. That step-by-step method is the beating heart of TOGAF. It's called the ADM, and it's exactly where we go next.